The Ketheri Dominion spanned thousands of star systems, its rule absolute. Its fleets were unmatched, its soldiers unchallenged, and its enemies either crushed or enslaved. Across the stars, all who resisted had been forced to kneel. Entire civilizations had fallen, their histories erased, their legacies reduced to footnotes in the Dominion's endless expansion. But despite their power, a shadow loomed over the Ketheri. A legend whispered in the darkest corners of conquered worlds. A name spoken in hushed tones, a warning passed from elder to child, from prisoner to prisoner. Humans. They were not a people, the Ketheri believed, but a myth. A fabricated tale designed to inspire hopeless rebels. No evidence of their existence remained. No ruins, no artifacts, no records beyond stories too ancient to be trusted. And yet, the legend refused to die. They said humans were different from any species the galaxy had ever known, that they had once stood against the greatest empires of their time and refused to bow, that they had waged wars not for conquest, but for the sheer defiance of it. Unlike other species, they did not surrender. They did not kneel. They did not break. Some stories claimed they had once ruled the stars, building weapons so advanced that even the Ketheri's most brilliant minds would struggle to understand them. Others whispered of a final apocalyptic war, one that had wiped humanity from existence, leaving nothing behind but ghost stories and fear. The Ketheri scoffed at these tales. If such a species had ever existed, they were long dead, and if they still lived somewhere in the void, hiding like frightened animals, then they were irrelevant. The Dominion was the only power that mattered now, but not everyone was so certain. In the dimly lit halls of the Grand War Council, High Strategist Vectorin, one of the oldest and most ruthless minds in the Dominion, leaned back in his chair as his advisors argued. A newly conquered species, the Velari, had begun speaking of humans again. Their dying warriors shouted the name in defiance as Ketheri blades cut them down. Their captured leaders whispered of an ancient call for aid, a message sent to the stars, hoping the lost warriors of legend would hear. It was nonsense, of course, and yet something about it unsettled him. Let them cling to their myths, one of his generals sneered. It changes nothing. No ghosts are coming to save them. Vectorin was about to agree, until the lights in the chamber flickered. For a brief moment, a strange distortion rippled through the Dominion's long-range scanners, a deep space anomaly, unregistered and unexplained. It was gone in an instant, dismissed as a glitch, but Vectorin felt something he had not felt in centuries. A presence. The legend was impossible. And yet, deep in the void, something had stirred, and it was coming. The Velari homeworld burned. From orbit, the once thriving cities of Velari Prime were nothing but glowing scars across the surface, choked by the smoke of a dying civilization. The Ketheri fleet hung in the skies above like a swarm of carrion birds, their warships blotting out the sun, their weapons reducing the last of the planet's defenses to dust. Inside the crumbling Velari command bunker, Supreme Commander Davin gritted his teeth as he watched the battle unfold on the massive hull of display before him. Red markers, enemy vessels, filled the screen. The last remaining Velari warships flickered as one by one. They were snuffed out. Their outposts were gone. Their colonies had fallen. This was the end. But Davin refused to surrender. "We can't win this fight," his second-in-command Jorva said, her voice hollow. "Not against them." Davin's gaze didn't waver. "We don't need to win. We just need to survive long enough for the message to be sent." Jorva exhaled, shaking her head. "We don't even know if they're real." Davin turned to her, his eyes burning with something deeper than desperation, conviction. They're real. For generations, the Velari had clung to the legend of humanity. To their people, the humans were not just a myth but a hope, a force that once existed, one that had challenged the strongest empires the galaxy had ever known. No one knew what had happened to them. Some said they had been wiped out in a final war. Others believed they had fled, disappearing into the deepest reaches of uncharted space. Either way, it didn't matter. What mattered was the call. A distress signal, sent in the ancient frequency, said to belong to the lost warriors of legend. The code had been passed down for centuries, embedded in the oldest records of their ancestors. No one knew if it would work. No one knew if anyone was still listening. But it was the only hope they had left. Jorva hesitated, then nodded. She turned to the comms officer, who was pale, hands trembling as he entered the final command sequence. "Signal is locked," the officer whispered. "Last chance to cancel." Davin inhaled sharply. Outside, another explosion rocked the planet as the Cathari ground forces began their final assault. The bunker's walls shook. Dust rained from the ceiling. There was no time left. "Send it." The officer pressed the command key. A pulse of energy shot from the ancient transmitter, streaking out into the void, carrying with it a single message in an old, forgotten language. A desperate plea, one that had been prepared for this moment centuries ago. Then, silence. The Velari bunker fell quiet. The battle outside continued. The Cathari were almost upon them. Jorva exhaled, voice barely above a whisper. "Now what?" Davin didn't answer. He only stared up at the bunker ceiling, beyond the metal, beyond the sky, toward the stars. Waiting. Hoping. Because if the legends were true, then the Cathari were about to learn the meaning of fear. The Velari had sent their desperate plea into the void, a last gamble on a legend that might never have existed. And now, there was nothing left to do but wait. Outside, the world burned. Cathari war machines advanced through the shattered streets, their towering frames casting long shadows over the ruins of what had once been a proud civilization. Gunships roared overhead, their engines howling as they rained destruction upon anything that still resisted. The last remnants of the Velari defense forces were being hunted down one by one, their last strongholds crumbling. In the command bunker, Supreme Commander Davin clenched his fists. He could hear the distant thunder of explosions growing closer. The enemy was almost here. Jorva swallowed hard. Still no response. Davin closed his eyes. He hadn't really expected one. He had wanted to believe. He had tried to believe. But now, as the final moments approached, he prepared himself for the inevitable. Then, something changed. The holographic display flickered. The distortion rippled through the bunker's communication systems. The power grid flickered, lights dimming as an unknown signal surged through their failing equipment. The comms officer's hands shook as he stared at his screen. I'm getting something. A response. Jorva snapped her gaze to him. From who? The officer's voice was barely a whisper. I don't know. For a moment, the signal was nothing but static, a deep, resonant hum that felt more like a presence than a transmission. Then, through the distortion, a voice came through, deep, commanding, and speaking in a language that had not been heard in living memory. Message received. The words sent a chill down Davin's spine. His breath caught in his throat. The room fell utterly silent. Then the sky cracked open. The first sign was the tremor, an unnatural vibration that rippled through the air, making every Cathari ship in orbit shudder, as if struck by an invisible force. The Dominion Warfleet, the most advanced force in the known galaxy, suddenly found its systems stalling, interference spreading like wildfire. Then the void itself seemed to bend. From beyond the edges of the system, gravitational distortions flared, tearing open rifts in space-time. One by one, massive objects emerged from the darkness, ships unlike anything the galaxy had seen in 1,000 years. They moved without hesitation, engines glowing with an eerie blue light, their hulls a cold, dark gray, marked only by one symbol. The insignia of a forgotten species. The insignia of humanity. The Cathari admiral, overseeing the battle from orbit, barely had time to react before his fleet's sensors went blind. He barked orders, demanding scans, hailing the unknown vessels. There was no response. Then, in perfect unison, the human warships fired. The first Cathari dreadnought vanished in a blinding flash as a single human weapon tore through its shields, through its armor, and detonated its core in an instant. The second and third suffered the same fate a heartbeat later. Panic spread through the Cathari ranks. This was impossible. There had been no warning, no build-up, no time to prepare. One moment, they had been the unstoppable conquerors of the galaxy. The next, they were being erased. Back in the bunker, Davin and his officers stared at the sky, at the streaks of fire as Cathari ships began to fall. Jorva's voice was barely above a whisper. "They're real." Davin exhaled, a slow, disbelieving breath. They came. And for the first time since the war began, hope ignited in the hearts of the Velari. Humanity had returned, and the Cathari were about to learn the cost of their arrogance. The Cathari fleet had ruled the stars for centuries. They had crushed rebellions, wiped out civilizations, and stood unchallenged against every force that dared to defy them. But now, as fire filled the void, their reign was unraveling in mere minutes. The human warships moved like nothing the Cathari had ever seen. They did not follow conventional battle formations. They did not hesitate, did not falter. They struck with the precision of predators, their weapons cutting through Cathari dreadnoughts as if their armor was nothing more than paper. Aboard the Dominion's command ship, High Admiral Vorkath struggled to make sense of the disaster unfolding before him. His war fleet, the most powerful armada in the known galaxy, was being torn apart with terrifying efficiency. "Report," he bellowed, claws digging into the command dais. A panicked officer turned, sweat beading on his scaled forehead. "We've lost 20 ships in the first volley. Their weapons, our shields can't stop them." Vorkath's mind raced. This wasn't just an attack. This was annihilation. Every strategy the Cathari had ever employed was useless. The humans were faster, their weapons were stronger, and worst of all, they fought with a level of precision the Dominion had never encountered. Retaliate. All batteries, fire at will. The Cathari fleet unleashed everything they had. Beams of high-energy plasma and missile barrages streaked toward the human ships. But then something happened that made Vorkath's blood run cold. The human ships moved, not chaotically, not in panicked evasions, but with an eerie, calculated rhythm. They adjusted their positioning in perfect synchronization, as if they had anticipated every shot before it was fired. The Cathari's most powerful attacks missed their marks, wasted against the endless void. Then the humans struck again. A formation of 5 human battlecruisers targeted the Dominion's flagship escort, a heavily armored warship bristling with weapons. The Cathari vessel barely had time to react before blue lances of energy cut through its hull, slicing it apart in seconds. Explosions rippled through the ship's structure, and then, with a final violent detonation, it was gone. Panic spread through the Dominion ranks. Officers shouted over each other, desperately trying to regain control. On the surface of Velari Prime, Supreme Commander Davin watched in awe. The night sky, once choked with the oppressive silhouettes of Cathari warships, was now alive with fire. Human ships weaved through the enemy ranks like specters, methodically dismantling the invaders piece by piece. Jorva stood beside him, mouth slightly open. "They're not just fighting," she murmured. "They're punishing them." Davin understood what she meant. The humans weren't just engaging in battle, they were demonstrating something. They were proving a point, one that the entire galaxy would soon understand. One Cathari vessel, a damaged battleship, attempted to retreat, breaking formation and accelerating away from the battlefield. It didn't get far. A single shot from a human warship, precise, merciless, pierced its engines. The ship went up in flames, its wreckage scattering across the void. There would be no escape. On the Dominion flagship, High Admiral Vorkath felt the weight of true fear for the first time in his life. He had always believed the stories of humanity to be myths, exaggerated tales of a species that had long since vanished. Now, as his fleet crumbled around him, he realized the truth. The legends had been understated. Humanity had not vanished. They had not been defeated. They had been waiting. And now they had returned to remind the galaxy of what they truly were. Vorketh clenched his fists, his mind racing for a way out. But deep in his gut, he already knew. There was no way out. High Admiral Vorketh had never known fear. He had commanded the Cathari Dominion's war fleets for decades, conquering countless worlds, breaking civilizations, and watching enemies crumble before the might of his empire. He had believed with absolute certainty that the Cathari were the apex predators of the galaxy. But as he stood on the burning bridge of his flagship, watching his once invincible armada disintegrate, he understood what true fear was. The humans were not warriors. They were something worse. They were executioners. Vorkath's claws trembled as he gripped the command dais. "Status report," he barked. The response was chaos. Officers scrambled to restore order, their voices overlapping in frantic desperation. "We've lost over half the fleet. Our weapons are ineffective. They're reading us. Every move we make. They counter it before we can even act. Admiral, we have to retreat." Vorkath's blood ran cold. Retreat? The Dominion did not retreat. But deep down, he knew this wasn't just a battle. It was a massacre. A new alert flashed across the war table. More human ships had emerged from the void, surrounding the system. These vessels were unlike the sleek destroyers and battlecruisers that had already decimated the Cathari fleet. These were colossal, dark behemoths that moved like ghosts, their presence alone suffocating. There were no names on their hulls, no markings beyond the old insignia of humanity. They did not respond to hails. They did not transmit demands. They simply arrived. The Ghost Fleet, someone whispered. It was a name spoken only in myths, stories passed down through conquered species, rumors of ships that lurked in the deep void, waiting, watching. No one had believed them. Now, as the shadow of the human war machines blotted out the stars, Vorkath understood why no records of humanity had survived. The humans had erased themselves. Not because they had been destroyed, not because they had lost, because they had chosen to vanish. They had become something else, an unseen force, a hidden power that had waited for the perfect moment to return. And now, that moment had come. The cold dread settled in Vorkath's gut. His fleet, the pride of the Dominion, was nothing more than prey. The realization sent a ripple of terror through his officers. "Admiral, we need orders," one of them choked out. Vorkath clenched his jaw. There was only one choice left. "Send a full surrender transmission," he growled. Now, a silence fell over the bridge. His officers stared at him in disbelief. "Surrender," one of them echoed. "We're the Dominion. We don't." "We do now." Vorkath's voice was cold as stone. "If we don't, we won't exist by the end of this day." The officer hesitated, then turned to the comms panel. A transmission was sent, a desperate plea for mercy. For the first time in Dominion history, they begged. Seconds stretched into eternity. No response. The Ghost Fleet remained silent. Then, across all frequencies, a single message came through. A voice. Cold. Ancient. Human. Request denied. Vorkath's breath hitched. Then the Ghost Fleet opened fire. High Admiral Vorkath had seen many battles, but he had never witnessed annihilation. The Ghost Fleet did not fight like any enemy the Cathari had ever encountered. There was no hesitation, no wasted movement, no arrogance in their attacks. Every strike was calculated, precise, merciless, and devastating. They didn't just destroy ships. They dismantled them, cutting through Cathari hulls with impossible accuracy, targeting reactors, ammunition stores, and command centers with inhuman efficiency. The Cathari fleet was dying, and there was nothing Vorkath could do to stop it. His claws dug into the command dais as he watched another Cathari battleship rupture from within, its structure torn apart before it even had a chance to fire. Escape pods ejected, but they were ignored. The humans didn't waste ammunition on the defeated. They didn't need to. "Admiral," a shaken officer whispered, "our reinforcements." "There are no reinforcements." Vorkath's voice was hollow. The Dominion had sent one of its largest battle groups to Villari Prime, certain of victory. There was no backup coming. This was it. But he was not ready to die. "We still have one option," Vorkath growled. "The Cataclysm Protocol." A stunned silence filled the bridge. Even the most hardened Ketheri officers hesitated. The Cataclysm Protocol was forbidden. A last resort designed for a scenario exactly like this, a moment when the Dominion faced complete destruction. It was not a counterattack. It was not a retreat. It was scorched earth. "Sir," one of his officers swallowed hard. "That will." "I know what it will do," Vorkath snapped. "Do you think the humans will spare us? Look at them. They are not invaders. They are not conquerors. They are hunters." He turned to his weapons officer. "Activate the sequence. Now." The officer hesitated for a heartbeat. Then, with shaking hands, he obeyed. Deep within the core of the remaining Ketheri warships, a hidden system activated. Ancient technology, buried beneath layers of security. The Cataclysm Protocol was not a weapon. It was an extinction event. In the skies above Villari Prime, the last surviving Ketheri warships began to glow, their cores overloading. If the humans wanted to exterminate the Dominion's fleet, then the Dominion would take the system with them. A supernova of destruction. A final, desperate gambit. Vorkath's lips curled in a grim smile. "Let them witness our wrath." But then, the Ghost Fleet moved. Faster than anything in Dominion history, the human warships surged forward, as if they had predicted the Ketheri's final move before it even began. Streams of energy fire lanced through space, targeting specific points on the Ketheri vessels, not to destroy, but to disable. The Cataclysm Protocol required a synchronized detonation. One ship alone could not trigger it. The humans knew this. And now, with horrifying precision, they were shutting it down. Vorkath's eyes widened. No, that's impossible. One by one, the Ketheri ships went dark. Their engines flickered out. Their core systems collapsed. The Cataclysm Protocol failed. The Dominion's last hope died in silence. And then, across every Ketheri channel, the humans spoke again. One voice, cold, unshaken, absolute. "Now you learn." The screens on the Ketheri bridge flooded with data. And for the first time, Vorkath understood. The humans had never left. They had been watching, studying, waiting. And now, as the last remnants of the Dominion fleet fell into their hands, Vorkath realized the horrible truth. The battle was never about Villari Prime. It was about the Dominion itself, and humanity was only just beginning. The battle was over. The Ketheri had ruled the stars for centuries, their dominion unquestioned, their power absolute. But in a single night, everything had changed. Humanity had returned. And now, the reckoning had begun. High Admiral Vorkath knelt on the cold floor of his ruined command bridge, his claws dull, his once imposing frame hunched under the weight of defeat. His flagship had been boarded without resistance. His crew had surrendered, their weapons clattering to the ground, their will shattered. And the humans had come for him. They did not gloat. They did not revel in their victory. They simply stood there, silent figures clad in dark, seamless armor, their helmets smooth and unreadable. Predators. One of them stepped forward. Unlike the others, this one wore no helmet. His face was carved with deep lines of age, his gray eyes like distant storms. Vorkath swallowed. He had commanded worlds, conquered empires. But now, under this single human's gaze, he felt like prey. The human spoke, his voice measured. "Do you know what happens next?" Vorkath's throat was dry. "You will destroy us," he rasped. The human studied him, tilting his head slightly. Then, slowly, he shook it. "No, A flicker of confusion crossed Vorkath's face. Then, what? The human stepped closer, his voice as cold as the void. You will watch. The bridge screens flared to life. What they showed made Vorkath's blood freeze. The Dominion was burning. Not just the fleet, not just the soldiers. The Empire itself. Humanity's return had not been a simple retaliation. It had been orchestrated, every move carefully planned. The Ketheri homeworld was under siege. Communications hubs had been severed. Military command centers had been obliterated. Entire fleets had been hacked, disabled, and turned against their own worlds. It was not war. It was a systematic dismantling. A lifetime of conquest, undone in a single night. Vorkath's breathing quickened. You can't. The human's gaze remained impassive. You believed us to be extinct. You called us myths. You erased us from history. He gestured to the screens. Now you will see the truth. A new image appeared. A Ketheri colony world, once thriving, now in ruins. Not from orbital bombardment. Not from fire. From abandonment. The humans had not slaughtered civilians. They had shut everything down. Power grids offline. Supply chains broken. Food stores erased. And the Ketheri, so accustomed to domination, had no idea how to survive without it. Vorkath's hands shook. He had never feared death. But this was worse. The human leaned down, voice barely above a whisper. The Dominion is finished. Not because we burned it, but because we proved you never deserved it. Vorkath let out a shuddering breath. What do you want? For the first time, the human's expression changed. A slow, almost imperceptible smile. We want you to remember. The bridge doors hissed open. More humans entered, silent, efficient. They placed binders on Vorkath's wrists, lifted him to his feet. He would not be executed. He would be paraded, a living testament to the greatest mistake the Dominion had ever made. They had forgotten humanity. And now, they would never forget again. The once mighty Dominion had fallen. Across the galaxy, Ketheri strongholds lay in silence. Their fleets, once symbols of fear and conquest, had been reduced to wreckage. Their worlds, once bustling with the machinery of war, had been hollowed out, not by fire, not by destruction, but by the sheer precision of humanity's return. They had not just lost a war. They had lost their place in the galaxy. High Admiral Vorkath stood aboard a human command vessel, his wrists bound, his presence reduced to that of a relic, a cautionary tale. The bridge was eerily quiet, its walls sleek and advanced beyond anything the Dominion had ever seen. The humans did not boast about their technology. They did not revel in their superiority. They simply were. Across from him stood the human commander, the one who had overseen the fall of the Dominion. His name was never spoken. His face betrayed no emotion. But his eyes held the weight of 1,000 battles. Vorkath finally broke the silence. Why? His voice was hoarse, heavy with the weight of everything he had lost. Why did you wait? You could have wiped us out centuries ago. The human's expression remained unreadable. Because we don't rule. We don't conquer. We watch. Vorkath let out a bitter laugh. Watch. You let us believe you were gone. You let us expand. You let us take the stars. His jaw tightened, and then you tore it all away. The human stepped closer, his presence an unshakable force. We gave you the chance to prove yourselves. He gestured toward the vast emptiness of space beyond the viewport. We watched as you expanded, as you enslaved, as you crushed weaker species under your heel. And still, we waited. We waited to see if you would change, if you would evolve. Vorkath's claws curled into fists, and when we didn't, you came back. The human nodded. Yes. The weight of it settled over Vorkath's shoulders. This had never been a war. It had been a test. And the Dominion had failed. Vorkath exhaled sharply. What now? The human's voice remained calm, unwavering. Now, you learn. A screen flickered to life, showing the Cathari homeworld. Once a jewel of their empire, its skies were now empty. Its military command was gone. The Dominion's infrastructure had not been obliterated, it had been severed. The Cathari were alone. No more fleets, no more conquests, no more war. Vorkath felt a chill spread through his bones. "You're leaving us." The human's expression didn't change. "Yes." Vorkath's breath caught. "That's it. You wipe away everything we've built, and then just leave." The human held his gaze. "You were never meant to rule the stars. We're giving them back to those you oppressed. You will no longer shape this galaxy's future." Vorkath felt something unfamiliar grip his chest, something far worse than anger or hatred. Helplessness. The Dominion was over. Not because they had been destroyed, but because they had been made irrelevant. Humanity had not just beaten them. They had reduced them to nothing. The human turned away, speaking over his shoulder one final time. "You thought we were legends. Now you will live in the shadow of the truth." The doors slid open. Guards motioned for Vorkath to follow. He had no choice. As he was led away, the realization sank in. The Cathari had once ruled the stars. Now, they were just a warning. A lesson written in history. A lesson never to be forgotten. Because humanity had returned. And this time, they would never be erased again. The galaxy belonged to them now. And it always had.